Greetings, and welcome to the Central Highlands. In this series, we'll summit each and every one of its fantastic Munros and delve into the history, nature, and geography of their surroundings. Each episode features detailed route descriptions, deeply researched local history, and vital information for the mountaineer that you may not find elsewhere. The journey continues with Ben Enich and Ben Enich. Welcome back. This time we return to Loch Awe in Argyll to climb the wonderful viewpoints of Beinn Eunaich and Ben Enich. Along the way, we'll explore the historic Kilchurn Castle, learn the secrets of Loch Awe's many islands, and look at how the Campbells of Argyll rose from humble beginnings to become arguably the most feared and powerful clan of all. If you find yourself enjoying the show, hit that like button and subscribe to get new episodes as soon as they arrive. These hills lie to the northwest of Loch Awe, between Glen Stray to the east and the wild Glen Kinglass to the north, with their proximity to the Cruachan Ridge, Loch Awe and the Isle of Mull offering a visual reward that belies their rather modest appearance from ground level. We begin at Loch Awe railway station and follow the A85 north to return off to Strunmilken, following this B road to take a left through a gate onto farmland. This track takes you from here to, well, basically halfway up the mountain. It should be noted that these are beginner level Munros and thus extremely popular, so if you value peace and solitude, you may find it in limited supply here. The path leaves the track after crossing the Beinn Eunaich, taking a boggy and indistinct line up the initially broad and featureless southeast ridge, where the steepness and alternation of rocks and bogs may give the bagger unpleasant flashbacks to Ben Enich, but as we all know, nothing is as bad as that, and the ridge begins to narrow as height is gained, with views to Cruachan appearing as the angle begins to ease and the various lines of ascent coalesce. From the terminus of the southeast ridge and the main fin of Ben Enich, the path bears west up to the rocky east ridge, where the views become positively Tolkien-esque in their duality. South, the sharp teeth and black cliffs of the Cruachan Ridge rise like the Eiffel Duath, while to the north, a clear day will reveal a mountain vista with few rivals in all the Central Highlands. The final summit cone is easy, and the broad summit reached with no difficulty or even the suggestion of exposure. The views here open west out to sea, with Mull's Ben more prominent, and with the spires of Cruachan to the left and Loch Awe in the foreground. Well, you'll see why this route is so popular. An easy wander back along the ridge to point 896 leads to a moderately steep descent to the Loch Eunaich, around 728 metres, where the obvious path leads forward up Ben Enich's west ridge. The first half is grassy until it bears southeast over more rocky ground, and while it initially looks like you may be in for a Cruachan-like clamber, the path winds its way up without any such obstacles. The summit rewards with the addition of the shapely Beinn Eunaich to the western panorama, which, caught in the evening light, may well have you checking that your eyes don't have HDR mode enabled. Be careful around the very sudden cliffs to the northeast, as they are rather unexpected given the relatively gentle slopes you've just ascended. Descent is via the south ridge, and before reaching the rocky Stop Moul, the path strikes right at a peat hag down surely the most challenging, or at least downright bloody annoying section of the entire Cruachan range. A 70-degree and at times worse descent down muddy, loose rock, which may well also contain a stream if there has recently been heavy rainfall. After exhausting your knees, patience, and likely your full vocabulary of expletives, the path chucks you out onto the hydro track, where you may well need emotional support. Joking aside, this is actually pretty dangerous and in winter a surely interminable hassle. Hats off to those who've climbed up this, but I wouldn't wish such an experience on my worst enemy. Well, okay, maybe my worst. Another picturesque little railway stop, Loch Awe station, lies jammed between the loch with its old jetty and the grandiose Victorian-era Loch Awe Hotel. Crossing the station car park to reach the A85, we then follow it north, and handily there's a pavement all the way up to the turnoff. Before we hit the Munros, we make a short detour to the old Campbell stronghold of Kilchurn Castle. Kilchurn Castle was the seat of the Campbells of Beinn Eunaich, a cadet branch of the main Clan Campbell that was situated at Inverary Castle. As we'll see later, the Campbells originated from an island stronghold at the south end of Loch Awe, and those who would become the Campbells of Beinn Eunaich relocated here to Kilchurn in 1450. At the time of its construction, the promontory on which the castle now stands was a very small island, not much bigger than the castle itself, which was accessed from the east, presumably on horseback, across a hidden causeway slightly submerged beneath the surface of the water. Very cool. Though its construction is often attributed to one of the Campbell patriarchs, Kilchurn Castle was actually built by Margaret Campbell, wife of Sir Colin Campbell, around 1450. Its construction proved a stressful endeavour, and not just in its engineering. Sir Colin was a Crusader knight, and left to fight the Turks in Rhodes before he and Margaret could be married, as you do, leaving the erstwhile Margaret to build the castle for him. During his crusading, many suitors tried it on with Margaret, trying to marry their way into the castle, by telling her Sir Colin had been killed and she really ought to wed them instead. Before he left, however, Colin broke a ring in two and gave one half to Margaret, with the other kept on his person. He told her that only when she held his half of the ring should she believe that he was dead. Despite this, the Baron Neil McCorkerdale, there's a bad guy name if ever there was one, eventually convinced her that Sir Colin had been slain and his half of the ring stolen by the dastardly Turks. She agreed to marry the Baron, but it doesn't seem like she was overly keen. Margaret told him the marriage would only take place once the Tower House was complete, and then asked the builders to slow down its construction. They could only work so slowly, however, and in a few months the castle was complete, and the dreaded day of the wedding to the conniving Baron arrived. But then, in a denouement so melodramatic it suggests apocrypha, Sir Colin rode in, presumably on a white steed, just as the vows were about to be said, brandishing his half of the ring. Of course, the wedding to the Baron was called off. She married brave Sir Colin, and they all lived happily ever after. Well, for about 25 years. This was medieval times, remember. In the late 16th and over the 17th century, the Campbells added a dining room at the south wall and chambers to the north, as well as the circular corner turrets. It was around this time that Kilchurn actually saw battle. In the late 15th century, MacGregors attacked, after which the castle was re-strengthened. In 1654, during the English Civil War between Parliament and the monarchy, Kilchurn withstood a siege by John Middleton, whose attempted insurrection on behalf of Charles I was driven back by the forces of the proto-republican battlemaster Oliver Cromwell. Later in the 17th century, Black Duncan Campbell, yes, that unpleasant guy with the cowl and the overcompensation problem from Series 1, enlarged and embellished the castle as part of his obsession with pointless status symbols and amateur dramatics. In the early 18th century, the castle was converted into military barracks for around 200 troops during the Jacobite rebellions of 1715 and 1745. In 1740, the Campbells moved to Taymouth Castle and endeavoured to sell Kilchurn to the government for military use, but the government chose to upgrade Fort William instead, which, that didn't work out too well for them. In 1769, the castle was struck by lightning and damaged so badly as to be abandoned shortly thereafter. The remains of a fallen tower, potentially the detritus of this event, lie in the courtyard where they fell. Following its abandonment, the castle was used by local fishermen to store their catch. Little did Margaret Campbell know that her grand castle would eventually become a fish warehouse. In 1817, the outflow of the loch into the River Awe was cleared to build what's now the A85, and this lowered the level of the loch by around a couple of metres, exposing the promontory on which the castle stands, and allowing access from the north shore. Today, Kilchurn is managed by Historic Scotland, and is open to visitors during the summer. It's certainly a very impressive building, and the outstanding beauty of its surroundings definitely merit a visit if you're in the area. And there they are, the two peaks we're tackling. Well, as you can see, these are pretty popular hills. This is where the track turns off from the main road, or say main road, but it's kind of a B road here, along to Stronmilken. Yeah, this is the track up to Castle's farm. There's kind of like three sort of junctions on it. Just stay left at all three of them and you'll find your way up onto the hillside. Let's get moving. Behind me up there you can see the other side of the Cruachan Ridge, and in particular Stop Daff, kind of in the middle of it there, Stop Garab, and then point 947, which looks a lot more impressive from down here than when we were on it. As mentioned last time, it's possible to access Ben Enich and Ben Enich from the Cruachan Ridge up there, over that Sronnan Isen, Chicken's Nose. From there you descend down behind the skyline to what's called the Larrig No, a fairly low pass between Sronnan Isen and Ben Enich as South Ridge up there, which, if you're up for that, go for it, but it's pathless, it's stony, and it's fairly thankless, hence why we're doing it in two separate stages. Now at this junction, private road to Castle's farm continues along there. Our way is up here. Hello. Not a bad place to stay, eh? Once past this gate and those fearsome Highland cows down there, we're now basically on the hydro track that takes us all the way to the start of the walk. The verdant craters on the hill opposite are abandoned quarries that have since been reclaimed by nature. And here we are at the little cairn that marks the descent route. Which, yeah, I don't know about the arrow on that cairn, but it looks a bit tasty to be starting off your climb with. We'll save that for last, I think. Here the track winds up to the left, around the corner, to fork off up the ridge shortly thereafter. Those eager to get their boots muddy may forge a direct path up to the higher track, but come on, we've had enough boggy walk-ins to know by now that if there's a track, you're best staying on it until you absolutely have to leave it. Drax Generation Enterprises certainly seem proud of their bridge structures, or as they're otherwise known, bridges. This is the Voyle Bridge, in reference to the Alt Voyle that runs down to the River Orkney and into Loch Awe. Amazingly, the tunnels of the Cruachan hydroelectric scheme extend under the mountains to the other side of Beinn Eunaich and Beinn Enich, right up to the edges of the scheme's catchment area. The tunnel tigers who built these tunnels certainly had their work cut out for them here. Before you know it, what have we here? We've found the little cairn that marks the start of the path. So without further ado, let's bash on up there. I'll say a path, but it's pretty indistinct in its early stages. The route certainly wouldn't be obvious in poor visibility. Well, here we are in the upper part of the southeast ridge, and the angle is beginning to ease off a bit, and our path becomes a bit more distinct. Not too far up to the ridge now. Let's get up there. Well, there it is. The summit ridge. The summit is beyond that cairn, about half a kilometre. But more to the point, bloody hell, look at Ben Cruachan from here. It looks crazy, doesn't it? Did we really climb that? Yeah, we did. And we came down that east ridge that's facing towards us as well. And here we are emerging on the summit ridge. You can see the summit along there. It's at the end of it. It's a compact little cairn here. Keep you right in the poor visibility. Again, no such problems with that today. Look at that, fantastic view back over there to Ben Louis. Looking down there to Loch Awe and Kilchurn Castle. Kilchurn is but one of many ruined castles, churches, chapels and graveyards scattered around the beautiful verdant islands of Loch Awe. The tiny Frauch Island contains a ruined castle, likely built in the 12th or 13th century by the MacDougals of Lorne. Its strategically valuable position allowed observation of the Pass of Brander, the main route in from the west of any potential invading force. It became a royal castle in 1267, when King Alexander III, seeking allies in the west after the Battle of Largs, granted tenancy of the castle to the Clan MacNaughton, who were to maintain it for royal visits. Their rent was a bowl of snow, nice deal, and this royal charter is one of the oldest surviving written documents in Scottish history. In the 14th century, it, along with just about every other castle in Argyll, was acquired by the Campbells, but the Macnaughton's took it back in 1745 and made it ready to host Charles Stuart of Bonnie Prince fame in case he passed this way after his landing at Glenfinnan. He chose another road, however, and the castle was abandoned by 1769. The castle on Innisconnell is the original stronghold of the Clan Campbell, or as they were known at the time, the lowly Campbells of Loch Awe. It was built around the 11th century or earlier, and it was the seat of Cullen Moore, Big Colin Campbell. Colin was killed by the MacDougals of Lorne at the particularly gruesome Battle of Red Ford in 1296, and the MacDougals held the castle until 1308 when, as we saw in the last episode, they were defeated by Robert the Bruce at the Pass of Brander. Big Colin's son, Neil Campbell, not only fought for Bruce at Bannockburn, but also married Bruce's sister Mary, so Bruce returned the castle and the land of Loch Awe to the Campbells for posterity. From this point onward, the power and influence of the Campbells would grow exponentially across the Central Highlands as good marriages, political opportunism, and no small amount of dirty tricks won favour with royalty and government alike. We'll look at this in more detail later in the show. Innisale, or the Isle of Rest, is an ancient graveyard. For many centuries, the dead were buried here to prevent their exhumation by hungry wolves on the mainland. It was the traditional burial ground of the MacArthur clan. From the 13th century onward, the chapel here was the parish church for all residents of the Loch Awe area, until the late 18th century, when the newly built mainland church of Cladich proved more convenient than a Sunday boat trip. Innisale was the resting place of the 11th and 12th Dukes of Argyll. Innisconan, or Conan's Isle, is named after the mytho-historical figure of St Conan. Architect and author Walter Douglas Campbell bought the island in the late 18th century and built Innisconan House and St Conan's Tower for himself, his artist sister, and their elderly mother. Walter Campbell also built the unique St Conan's Kirk on the mainland nearby, an architectural smorgasbord of eclectic styles that make it Scotland's #1 church or cathedral to visit, according to its local advertising. Innisconan was joined to the mainland by a causeway in the mid-20th century, allowing access to its residences. The 2011 census recorded 5 inhabitants. Not far to go now to our first Munro of the day. Let's mosey on over there. Well, not a bad summit ridge at all, as you can see. Looking over there to Ben Starab, back up there to the Bridge of Orkney Range, and over here, the incredible Ben Cruachan, and our summit, Ben Aul. Let's do it. And here we are at the summit, Ben Aul, 980 metres, Mountain of the Shell, or the Cowl, take your pick. Certainly a very fine prospect it commands. The incredible Ben Cruachan over there, and we're getting a grandstand seat out there to Benmore and the Isle of Mull. Done it. We've heard the name Campbell again and again throughout our explorations of Scottish history. We've visited their many castles across the Southern Highlands and learned their often gruesome histories. We've heard how these so-called Lords of Argyll ruled the lands from the mouth of the Tay to Loch Awe in the west, relentlessly persecuting and hunting down their enemies, and displaying a taste for violence and bloodshed remarkable even for medieval times. As we embark across the Central Highlands and its complicated history, it's time to find out just who the Campbells were, and how exactly they became so powerful. The Campbells likely originated among the ancient Welsh-speaking folk of the Old Kingdom of Strathclyde. The name Campbell is derived from the Gaelic nickname Campbell, meaning twisted mouth. While not very flattering, this actually refers to the fact that they didn't speak Gaelic, thus their speech was twisted. As mentioned, they built a castle on Innisconnell sometime in the 11th century, and became known as the Campbells of Loch Awe. Their chief, the aforementioned Big Colin Campbell, was knighted in 1280, becoming Sir Colin, the first Campbell knight. His nickname became the official title of future clan chieftains, Cullen Mór. Having gained back their land in Argyll and then some, thanks to Robert the Bruce, the Campbells greatly benefited from Bruce's introduction of the feudal system. They also benefited from careful, some might say cynical, political alignments which saw them bestowed with increasingly powerful titles. In 1445, James II raised the peerage of Sir Colin's descendant, Duncan Campbell, from knight to lord, becoming the first Lord of Argyll. In the late 1360s, Campbell chief Gillespie won even more large estates in the west, and in the interests of security, inveigled his way into the favour of local nobleman Robert Stewart, who just so happened to be crowned King Robert III shortly thereafter in 1371. What a coincidence! This friendship saw the Campbells made hereditary royal lieutenants in the southwest Highlands, an incredibly powerful position they took up with relish. Sir Colin Campbell's grandson, Sir Colin Campbell, bear with me, the Crusader knight we learnt of at Kilchurn Castle, was made Earl of Argyll in 1457. In 1483, through marriage, the Campbells' service as royal courtiers and military service against the MacDonalds, Colin was given the highest position in the royal government, that of Lord Chancellor. In 1641, the 8th Earl of Argyll was made a Marquess by Charles II, who sought to quell the unrest his failed insurrections into Scotland had garnered. When Oliver Cromwell emerged victorious from the English Civil War, the Marquess of Argyll effectively ruled Scotland until the restoration of the English crown, whereupon he pledged his allegiance to the new king, only to be charged with treason and executed in 1661. In 1701, in recognition for his services to King William of Orange, the 9th Earl's son was made Duke of Argyll, the most powerful peerage of all. The Duke of Argyll was the clan chief of all the Campbells and became a title synonymous with power and prestige in the Central Highlands. The current Duke of Argyll is the 13th to hold the title. Since the 12th century, kings sought to undermine the power of the Highland clan chiefs by using the oldest trick in the book, divide and conquer. Long-standing inter-clan grievances were exploited to the political gain of the monarch. With the fall of the MacDonalds' lordship of the Isles, a stabilising force in the Highlands, social order began to deteriorate, and clan feuding escalated to new levels of violence. This became known as Linn nan Cruach, the Age of the Forays. The Campbells proved to be very, very good at playing the clans against each other, using subterfuge and political ingratiation to gain the aforementioned titles, and with them lands across Breadalbane and Glenorchy, often of rival clans that had been ruled as forfeit, such as those of the MacGregors, backed by the crushing power of the crown. These conquests developed into cadet branches or offshoots of the Campbells of Argyll, such as the Campbells of Glenorchy at Kilchurn Castle, the Campbells of Breadalbane, the Campbells of Glenlyon, and so on. Their acquisition of castles extended all the way to the Argyll Hills in Stirlingshire, where Castle Gloom became Castle Campbell, though I prefer the original. As we learned at Achalader, Black Duncan Campbell, the first baronet, was even effectively given a military police force to ensure his dominion over the Central Highlands. See, clans were bad, but the Campbells were alright because they played the game. For an example of Black Duncan's shameless skullduggery, check out episode 21 of Series 1. Remember General Wade of road building fame? Well, in 1724, eager to find new ways to crush those rebellious Scots, Wade devised an ingenious plan to deplete the Highland clan's forces by creating Highland Watches, local militias who would be employed by the Crown to police and monitor clan activity in the glens. Sounds like a perfect job for the Campbells, right? Indeed it was. The first watch was founded in Aberfeldy and comprised 3 companies of soldiers from Clan Campbell, with more recruited from the Frasers, Grants and Munros. By 1739, the militia had become known as the Black Watch. With it began the deliberate strategy of removing young men from the Highlands who might otherwise have fought against the British state. In the British quest for empire between 1756 and 1815, it's estimated that as many as 75,000 men were recruited from the Highland glens. How can you better employ a secret enemy than by making his end conducive to the common good? General James Wolfe smugly opined during operations in French Canada. From their seat of power at Inverary Castle on Loch Awe, the Campbells were feared, hated and admired throughout the Highlands in equal mainly the first 2. Previously, the MacDonalds, the Lords of the Isles, had held the claim of the most powerful clan, their ancient western Highland and Island domain unparalleled in its reach. Over the 15th century, however, their power declined, and the Campbells saw themselves as the natural successors at the top of the pile, taking many of the MacDonald lands and with them their prestige. This was likely a factor in stoking the intense rivalry between the MacDonalds and the Campbells, a brewing hatred that would reach its bloody nadir in the snows of Glencoe. The Campbells' other fierce enemy were the MacGregors, who, as we learned at Castle Dochart, they had outlawed so that they could take their lands and basically attempt their extermination with the help of the Crown. Understandably perturbed with this arrangement, the MacGregors fought back in countless guerrilla raids against the Campbells over the centuries, with many meeting a grim demise at Taymouth or Finlarrig castles. The Campbells did enjoy a good beheading. While the MacDonalds and MacGregors may have been far from paragons of virtue themselves, their reputations as devils and savages must be weighed against consideration of who wrote the history books. The closest the Campbells ever came to being knocked off their perch was the disastrous Battle of Inverlochy in 1645, where Sir Duncan Campbell fell and around 1,500 Campbell soldiers were either slaughtered or drowned in Loch Linnhe. This seriously diminished the power of Clan Campbell for a whole generation. Normal service was resumed by the turn of the 18th century. I should point out that there was probably many perfectly nice Campbells, like Red Duncan of the Hospitality at Kilchurn Castle, but sadly they just don't make the headlines, so to speak, unlike their monstrous relatives like Black Duncan or Captain Robert Campbell of Glenlyon. We'll learn a lot more about the Campbells as we explore the Central Highlands, and, spoiler alert, it gets worse. Here we are making our way down to the Larrig Inachen, and this last bit's pretty steep and stony, and we lose about 175 metres unfortunately from the last point that we were at, but hey, the ascent of Ben Enich here doesn't look the most challenging that we've ever done, so yeah, let's bash on over there. Well, here we are making our way up Ben Enich, and absolutely gorgeous background you get. Just heading up towards the steeper bit up there, so we can make out those two folk are going up. So yeah, see you further up the hill. Well, here we are making our way up the final summit slopes to the top of Beinn Eunaich, up its western ridge here. It's just it's steepening, but it's nothing worse than the southeast ridge of Ben Aul, so don't worry yourself. It's certainly no Ben Cruachan. And the views behind are absolutely incredible, as you can see. Looking over there to the north, you can actually make out Buccleuch Moor, but also Crowberry Tower. There in silhouette. Fantastic, isn't it? In front of the grey corries there in the background. And Beinn Eunaich and Beinn, that menacing, brooding, dark hulk there in the kind of middle distance. And Ben Starriff to its left. Ben Finlay over there. And yeah, looking down there to Glen Ative, Loch Awe and the Isle of Mull. Absolutely fantastic visibility today out west. It's the last leg. Let's get up there. Well, here we are, approaching the summit of Ben Enich, and absolutely incredible panorama back there to Ben Cruachan, Ben Aul, and the Isle of Mull beyond. Here we are, Beinn Eunaich, Hill of the Many Birds, or the Bird-Rich Hill, or Hill of the Fowling, take your pick. Little wind shelter here as well. Alright. At Ben Eunaich's eastern corrie, Caergarvlach, lies the at one time notorious Black Chute, a deep, vertiginous gully that proved an early adversary of the newly formed Scottish Mountaineering Club, finally yielding to Willie Naismith of Naismith's Rule fame. It remained a test piece for aspiring alpinists throughout the Victorian era. Here we are heading down the southeast ridge of Ben Enich, and you can see right down at the bottom there Stop Mole, the bold peak in front of Kilchurn Castle there. Now before we get to that, basically because it's at the head of a rather craggy section, there's a little peat hag scar across the ridge. You can just see someone in front of it there, and that's basically where we head back down to the hydro track and the little cairn that we saw at the start of the walk. Beautiful vista down there to Kilchurn Castle and Loch Awe, and the Cruachan Ridge there, looking beautiful in front of the sunset. All the way over there behind Ben Aul, you can see Ben More of Mull, the Lord of the Isle, which we shall be visiting in this series. Looks pretty easy, doesn't it? Beyond here, the slope suddenly inclines to an alarming degree. Concentration is required just to stay on your feet. Yeah, no, seriously, this is a pain in the arse. And I can only imagine what it would be like ascending this way, so ignore that jaunty little arrow on the cairn down there. It's not worth ascending this way, and coming down it is... And I've got pretty good knees. Wow. Not what you need at the end of a day, but here we are, down at the hydro track. Base camp awaits. That's all for now. Thanks again for watching. Really hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, hit that like button and subscribe. Next time, we'll head back to Bridge of Orchy and Loch Tulla to climb the Goliath, Stop Gavar. Till then, enjoy your adventure.